Welcome to How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rietta.
And I'm Connie. And today we're here with Claire Audibert. So Claire, how do you deal when shit gets real? But just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's such a pleasure and such an honor to be speaking with you tonight. Well, I'm here to talk to you about our son Elliott, who's now 7 and was born with a very rare and catastrophic form of genetic epilepsy. And here to discuss with you how we deal in our family when the shit gets real.
Start by explaining Elliott's diagnosis and such for our listeners.
Of course. So Elliott was born. It took us a long time to actually get a diagnosis, but just to, I'll go through that in more detail, but to cut to the chase, Elliott has what we call KCNQ2. It's such a rare disease that it actually doesn't have a proper name. It's just the name of the gene that has the mutation. It usually presents in the first few days of life, usually in the first week. And it presents with epilepsy. So usually the child starts seizing very quickly after being born. And for Elliott, he actually started seizing in the delivery room. And then there's a very wide spectrum of symptoms and presentations. So some kids are actually okay and, develop almost typically and, go on and have what we would say a normal life. And then some other are more severely impacted and impaired and can have a wide range of physical and mental disabilities. A lot of the kids, have feeding issues. So a lot of them are, tube fed. Some of them, can be wheelchair bound. And a lot of the kids will also have comorbidities like ASD. So it's autism spectrum disorder or ADHD. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Elliott is probably on the milder end of the spectrum because he's walking, he's running, he's 7 now, he's starting to talk. So he's putting a few words together, which is good because a lot of kids, can be nonverbal. But he also ended up with multiple diagnoses. So he also has ADHD and more recently was diagnosed with ASD. So it's a lot to manage and a lot to handle. For him, and I should probably point that out, and for a lot of kids with KCNQ2, it's a de novo mutation. And what we mean by de novo mutation is that it's not inherited. So neither is Dad or myself are carriers. It just happens, as doctors would tell us. It's just bad luck, which does definitely not help when you're being told this as a parent. But we're not carriers, and Elliott now has a little brother, and the little brother doesn't have it either.
So he does fall on the autism spectrum as well.
Yes, he does. He does.
So, okay. So he's just now starting to talk, and I'm assuming does that have more to do with the autism, or is it a combo of both?
We don't know. So, and that's what's tricky, that it's so rare. And there is a lot of research now into KCNQ2 and genetic epilepsy more broadly, but we still don't know much about it. And so no one actually can tell us whether the delay that he has is the condition itself, like the mutation, or the seizures that he had when he was a baby, or the impact that the medication might have had. It's just that it's probably...
It's just, you have to roll with it. Here you go.
Yeah. Like, here are the cards, just deal with them.
Yeah. Does he take a lot of medicine?
He did as a baby. And when he was
newborn,
we spent over 2 weeks. We spent over 2 weeks in NICU. So the neonatal intensive care unit when he was born. We got sent straight away just a few hours after he was born and started having seizures. And initially, they just didn't know what was happening. So they started anti-epileptic drugs that kind of, knocked him out for a couple of days. And then we thought things were better. And turns out they weren't. And when they tried to wean him off the anti-epileptic drug, he started having more seizures. And when we were in NICU, he had up to 15, 20 seizures a day, which was incredibly scary. And we just didn't know which way was up. The doctors were at a loss. As I mentioned, it's not inherited. And what this meant at the time was that we had no exposure whatsoever to epilepsy in general and no experience of what it could be. And so we just didn't know how to react, what to do, what would be causing this. Obviously, we went through everything, from, could it be through the pregnancy? Could it be something that, is genetic, but we can't see it at the time? And so it took just over 2 weeks for the doctors to suspect that it was KCNQ2. And then we started him on a medication that is proven to work really well for kids with KCNQ2. And it worked for Elliott, which was very lucky in a sense. But that period of 2 weeks, he had many different medications because they were trying multiple drugs to make sure that they could stop the seizures and find what was going on. And sure. Nowadays, to answer your question, and nowadays he doesn't anymore. So he's not on medication on a daily basis. He not anti-epileptic drug, but he does have some medication for anxiety.
So how did they end up handling him having seizures in the delivery room?
Yeah, I mean, that's
scary.
It is incredibly scary. And I think what's really scary in this situation is that I don't want to say they didn't, because they did everything they could, but initially they didn't even know that they were seizures. And the reason for that is that KCNQ2, it doesn't, and I mean, I knew nothing about epilepsy when Elliott was born. I've learned a lot since then. But his whole body was stiffening, and that's actually, something quite common with KCNQ2, but not common with epilepsy in general. And so initially they thought that it was sleep apnea. So they kind of took him on our observation for a couple of hours, and he didn't do it then. So they were pretty reassuring. And then the next day when he did it a couple more times, they were like, oh, well, we'll just send him to NICU and we'll just check and make sure that everything is okay. But I think because it was so unexpected and everything was going well, and I had a very healthy pregnancy, no one thought that it could be this bad, basically, and this serious. And so everyone was pretty reassuring. And then it escalated pretty quickly, because within 24 hours, he was then having multiple tests, having lumbar punctures, MRI, etc., just to check that what it was. So I think that kind of moment from everything's going well and you're not really sure what's happening. Like, I remember thinking, are they meant to be moving like this? Because I had no idea what a newborn was meant to be doing, basically. Right. I felt I was so naive. And then going from that to actually he's going to be in NICU and we're going to run a bunch of tests because we have no idea what is going on, was incredibly scary.
Oh yeah. And you just gave birth and everything, and now they're going, okay, we're taking your baby away to find out what's going on, and you're like, what?
Yeah, you've just been giving birth, and you feel like you've been hit by a train. And I lost a lot of blood, so I was really weak. And so Cedric, my husband, had to wheel me, like I was in a wheelchair, and so he had to wheel me around the hospital, like multiple times a day and night and everything. But yes, pretty harrowing experience.
I would say so.
So was having your second baby like different on a whole nother level? Because you're like, so this is what a newborn is supposed to act like.
Yeah. Having my second has been, I don't think we were quite ready. So when I found out I was pregnant, that was quite the experience as well. And then, so that's when we found out that Elliott had KCNQ2, because before then, all the tests had came back negative. And so the doctors had actually sat us down and said, well, we don't know what's going on. Obviously, there is something serious going on, and we can't find out what it is. We had done some genetic testing, but it had been inconclusive. But they said, we still feel that it's genetic. And it was a really difficult conversation, because at that stage, they had told us, well, we don't recommend having more kids because you could actually have another child with the same condition. And because we don't know what's going on, and it's likely that it's a condition on the spectrum, it could be better, it could be worse.
Oh my God.
And then I fell pregnant with my second. And so I told my husband, and then the next next person I called was the geneticist. And then I said, I'm pregnant again. What do we do? And so they ran more tests and like extended genetic testing. And that's when they found out that Elliott had KCNQ2 and it was a de novo mutation. So we weren't carriers, but we had our second tested in utero just to make sure that he didn't have the same mutation, which he doesn't. So that was obviously positive, and it was a more relaxing pregnancy because it would have been really stressful otherwise not to know. And having him it's been the best thing for our family, but it's been really hard at the same time. And it's interesting because when you said, oh, this is what they're meant to be doing, it's been amazing to see that and to actually realize what it could be. But then at the same time, it's sometimes so hard because we realize what life could have been if we had 2 kids that are neurotypical and healthy. But yeah, so they're
one of those bittersweet things.
Yeah.
The good thing and the sweet things.
Yeah. So how old is the littler one?
So the little one is 5 years old. So they're just 22 months apart.
Do they get along?
They do. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, that's good at least.
Yeah. That's quite amazing. They get along really, really well, which is good. I think the little one really understands. I mean, he asks a lot of questions, and we've always made it a priority to explain to him as much as we can, and obviously as much as is appropriate for his age. But every time he asks a question, we try to answer. And so it can range from, why does my brother have, a disability, to, oh, why does he do this now? It was interesting when COVID hit to have the conversation between, it's a condition you can catch, but it's different from a stomach flu and different from what Elliott has. And it was very confusing he was 3 at the time.
I bet.
Really interesting conversation around, you can't catch Elliott disease, but you can catch COVID, but it's not like the stomach flu. It was, but
poor thing. He was probably so confused.
He was, but he gets there. And and now as he grows a bit older, and he understands a lot more. We can see he looks after Elliott a lot more as well. Like he kind of like helps him and supports him. And we've always made it a point not to ask him to do things, for Elliott, but sometimes he does, and it's just cute.
Oh yeah.
That's so sweet.
It is.
It is.
Yeah, they're both really sweet.
I bet they have their own brotherly way of communicating, even though I know you said Elliott just started talking, but I bet they have their own little way of communicating with each other.
They do and they don't. So they do in a sense where you can see they kind of get along and they understand and they love each other very, very much. But then at the same time, that's probably one of the hardest things to manage, between the 2 siblings, is that very often Oscar is actually asking why he can't really play with Elliott. And I think that's where not so much, the delay, but more, ASD comes in, because Elliott has trouble understanding social interactions and how you play with someone else. And so,
yes.
But yeah, sometimes Oscar is kind of frustrated almost, and he's like, well, why doesn't Elliott,
why can't I play with my brother like this?
Yeah, exactly. We've had those questions. Yeah.
It can be hard to understand for sure. One of my son's really good friends when we lived in Hawaii was autistic. And when they first met, even for him, when he first met, he was probably about Elliott's age, like 7 or 8. And it was harder to understand. But as he got older, because he's 10 now, it became easier for him to understand that you just have to play with him a little different. And sometimes he's there and sometimes he's not,
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing. And that's why we keep talking to him and trying to, be really open and honest and help him understand how to play with him or how to ask questions. And it's simple things, but sometimes Elliott doesn't. And I'll give you an example. That's not an example from Oscar, but from a friend. We went to dinner one day and she was carrying a dish and the dish was hot. And so Elliott kind of came forward and she was like, oh, it's hot, it's hot. And I was like, actually, you have to tell him, don't touch or move backward. But if you just say it's hot, he doesn't understand what this means. You actually have to tell him what you want him to do or what he should be doing. And it's kind of do not touch the pot or go backward. But if you say it's hot, he kind of like doesn't get it.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same for, playing with kids. It's like they have their own way of communicating, and it's hard for Elliott to understand, because unless you tell him, pass the ball, go over there, he just doesn't actually get it.
Yeah, and they're kind of in their own little bubble. They're in their own like little world. So they're just having fun and hanging out, and they're like, I don't need these other people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very true.
So since you mentioned COVID, tell us about your move from Australia back to Paris, or not back to Paris, back to France, because not everybody lives in Paris, Connie. In my mind, though, that's what happens.
That was an interesting move. I think that's probably the first word that comes to mind. So we lived, just to give a little bit more background and a little context. So we lived in Australia for over a decade, but we're originally both French, my husband and I. We moved together to Australia when we were young, and initially for 2 years, and then, decided to stay, and then we got married, and then we had kids, and, decided to have our family in Australia and raise them there. And when COVID hit, because we're French Australian, we've got both citizenships, they decided to shut down the borders, which meant that no one could get into the country and no one could actually get out. And for us, what this meant was that potentially we wouldn't be seeing our families for a very long time. And we just decided that it was too much and we couldn't actually do that. So we took the last flight out of Australia for France. It was hectic because, as you remember at the time, like planes were being cancelled. It was hectic. The airports were full. It was insane. So we kind of took our suitcases and just, left. It was horrendous with the 2 kids, and especially with Elliott, who was not understanding what was happening. Multiple reasons. I then went back to kind of sort everything out, see whether that was a month situation or a longer one, whether we could actually go back after, spending time with family or not. And turns out that, as we all know, it took a lot longer than a month to reopen.
Yeah. It was always just another month. Yeah. And it was never an ever-ending other month.
No, exactly. And so 2 years later, we decided that the move would be a permanent one when, it became apparent that it was more than a month and it was actually getting longer and longer and longer. But yeah, that first decision was just made really quickly. We're very happy that we made the move because we've had more family support. And I think it's one of those things where we hadn't really realized somehow how hard it was to do it overseas with no family support, with a child that has a disability. We had such a strong support network. We had great friends, had an amazing moms group who, they were all very, very supportive, but it was still really hard. I mean, having, 2 kids overseas, your parents 365 days a year, and you just get no rest, no respite, no nothing. And we did it because we loved it and we loved our life in Australia, and we both loved our jobs, etc. But I think coming here and having that support, it just has made us realize how hard it was before. I mean, it's still hard now, but at least we've got a little bit of respite and we've got some family around. We still miss Australia, and obviously we decided to stay there for so long because we absolutely loved our life there. But it's been, given our family dynamic, it's been good to be back.
Yeah, definitely. That's why our plans, like we've talked about moving, and then it always ends up stopping because it's like, but we're so close to family here.
Yeah.
And now with our own kid, it's like, oh, probably not.
Yeah, I've even said to her, because my husband's military, and we've experienced the same thing, bouncing all over the place, and this is the closest we've been to family in 12 years. So I've said to her and people all the time, like, don't underestimate how amazing it is being near family, because I would give anything to have that.
Yeah. And I think for us, we knew how important it was, and our family, we were lucky that they could come. So my mom, would come every 6 months. And that was also part of why we made the decision to move back, is because we said we can't not be with them. It's basically when no one knew what was going to happen with COVID. We're like, we can't stay away. In Australia is very far from France. It's like 2 flights, 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's not just, something you can hop on a plane and, the next morning you're there. It just felt like we couldn't take that risk.
Makes sense. So tell us more about, well, we know more about it, but our listeners don't, tell us about your book, The Letter E, and what inspired you to write it.
I'm a big reader. I've always, read a lot, and I've always liked writing, but, it's never been anything, conclusive. Like I've just, when Elliott was born, I took lots of notes and I was kind of writing, some thoughts and things. And when he was about 1, I just decided, I was like, okay, this is, because it took me a long time to accept that, Elliott was actually sick and that life would be a lot more complicated than I had anticipated. And so when he was 1, I was like, okay, I'd like to read more testimonials from parents. And at the time, there wasn't much on social media. There's a lot more now, but 7 years ago, there wasn't much. So I went to, one of the big bookstores, and there wasn't anything that I could find. There were lots of professionals that were writing about, disability. Then there was a lot of parents who were sharing about their kids, and very importantly, gifted kids, and kind of like how to support them. And then for disability, there was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time, but it was kind of in the back of my mind. And I was like, oh, I wish something would exist. And one day I was like, I wonder if I could just write about our journey, and that could, help others as well, because I can't be the only one that wishes that there was more support and, more resources out there. And so I started writing the book that I wanted to read, basically. And so I shared our story, and I've decided to write it in 2 voices. So it's in both my voice and Elliott's voice.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so what this meant is that I could be as open and as raw as I wanted to be, and actually share, the highs that are really high and the lows that are incredibly low, and share, what went through my mind at the time, but also make it a little bit lighter and a bit more hopeful and a bit more fun with Elliott's voice. Because, like in the midst of, all the doctor's appointments and the fears and the stress and, the fatigue and the exhaustion, he was a really cute baby. And, he was just full of life and love and hope. And I wanted this to transpire through the book as well.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
Yeah. So it's, and I'm really happy and really proud of it, because I've had a lot of people, kind of contact me and say that it's helped them. It's families who are going through similar situations. So not necessarily KCNQ2 or epilepsy, but just, children with complex medical needs, but also some, ex-co-workers or people who support, who actually have families that are going through similar situation. And I'm really glad that this is coming through in the book, because what I wanted was something that would help families like ours, but also people around them to understand. So it could be, someone at work, that has a colleague, with children that may have, complex medical needs, to help them understand what it can be like. And a lot of people have told me, we only saw the tip of the iceberg, and we didn't realize all of this was going on at the time.
Yeah, I bet. I love that all these moms are taking control. We had another mom that she lost her husband, and she couldn't find books to tell her children about what was going on. And she did the same thing. She's like, I'm going to write a book because I couldn't find a book that I needed. And now here you are doing the same thing, and you couldn't find the book that you needed. And you're like, I'm going to write it. I love it. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. And it's been hugely cathartic as well. Like I hadn't anticipated how much it would be, helpful to me as well. I think when I set out to write it, I was like, okay, I'm just going to write what I would want to read. And I'm hoping that will help, many others, but at least one family, like there has to be someone else that, will read it and feel better and less alone, knowing that others have walked through that path and have felt the same way. But when I kind of like wrote the end, I also felt like this huge relief, because now this is out there, and one day the kids will, or at least Oscar, my second one, will read it, and it's their journey.
Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah, actually, it also reminds me of our other podcast. What is it? I was going to say host, but I'm the host. On another podcast that we did where his son is on the spectrum and now just started getting epilepsy
Yes.
recently. So it was like, wait, what? What's going on? Now something else?
Yeah. And I think that's really hard. And people probably don't understand just how much everything is just kind of together, and you can be going through, feeling like you've got some stuff under control, and you're like, well, okay, I think I've got this part figured out now. And then everything changes the next day. And that's what's really hard to live with. It's, I think any child with complex needs, but especially with things like epilepsy or, is you've got a strategy in place and you're thinking that works really well. And then the next day it just goes
it doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work anymore. Like,
all of a sudden that just doesn't work.
We're going to have to send your book to him so that he has another resource, even though, like you said, it's not quite the same, but maybe it'll give him something to help figure out his son's new epilepsy issues.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So you talked about like the highest highs and like the lowest lows. What was your highest high and what was your lowest low?
That's such a good question. And I think what's really tricky is that every high is kind of, the highs are the highest and the lows are the lowest, but there's nothing that's either easy or hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're kind of like in that perpetual state of everything is just bundled together. And I'll give you an example. When I went back to work after Elliott was born, it was really important for me to go back. And we were lucky enough that my husband, Cedric, had a paternity leave available from work. And so we decided he would take it. And so I went back to work. Going back to work was actually really easy because Elliott was with his dad. He was at home. But then at the same time, it's so hard because every time I was meeting someone who was asking, oh, how's the baby? Oh, how was mat leave? Did you have a lovely time? And I was like, oh, not really, and it took me such a long time to actually figure out, it's kind of like that, hello, how are you, in the morning. And people don't actually, the expected answer is fine, thanks, how about you?
It's not the real answer of, it's been rough.
Yeah.
And some people, I was like, it's been really, really hard. And they were like, oh, okay, I've got to go. And
that's nice. Bye.
You're like, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was really hard. But then I'm very aware that having the luxury of having my husband at home with Elliott, so I could focus on work, was easy. And it's we had that conversation around my second, and it's the same. It's the easiest thing we've done, and everything feels really easy and smooth with him because obviously our benchmark is Elliott and his very complex needs, and everything is I don't want to say challenging because not everything is challenging, but everything is a bit harder.
It's different.
And with my second, everything feels smooth because, actually
it's normal.
It's within the normal range. It's what you expect, and he understands, like, he can have a tantrum in the middle of a supermarket, but if you tell him, well, no, you're not going to have this, he gets it and he's okay with it. Elliott, if he loses it in the middle of the supermarket because somehow he decided he wants that packet of cereal and he wants to eat it here and there, it's really hard to calm him down because it's not actually rational. He can't actually control it. And I think I've kind of like, gone a little bit sideways, but that perpetual state of everything is hard and easy at the same time is really hard. And I think before having kids and before having Elliott, I had no idea that was possible. was almost like, oh, it's either very easy and something that you enjoy, or it's really hard and challenging. And having that spectrum of actually everything is a little bit of both is tricky. But we've had real highs, like when he walked for the first time, because doctors initially said he may never walk. And we had really lows, like seizures when we thought that they were gone forever, and sleep issues. He had a period when he was younger of about 6 months where about 3 times a week he would just wake up screaming and like,
oh no,
2 hours relentlessly.
Oh man.
And apparently that's pretty common. So it's I've had a chat with a few KCNQ2 parents, and that happens. But yeah, that was hard. And once the neighbor came and checked in and was like, I can hear him scream a lot during the night, is everything okay? And we're like having to explain, and saying, yes, no, he's fine, but
he's fine,
not.
but this is the situation.
Yeah, he's fine, but not really, kind of thing. Like, don't worry about it, but no, it's not a normal situation.
We're not killing him, but we're not neglecting him either.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's like, and no, they're not night terrors, and no, we don't know what to do, and yes, we're doing the best we can.
Yeah,
all you can do. That's all any parent can do, no matter what, is the best you can do.
Yeah.
Yep. So what do you hope other moms would gain from your experiences?
I think the main, at least what has really helped me, is the main thing is to know that you're not alone. I think it took me a very long time to realize that. And part of it was probably self-created almost, because as I said, and everyone will be on different, on a different journey, and everyone will be on their own kind of go through their own grief process. But it took me a very, very long time to accept. And it took me a long time to reach out to communities, and actually to reach out even to the KCNQ2 community. First, because even if we suspected that it was KCNQ2, we weren't sure that it was, because we didn't have a diagnosis for a very long time. And I think that was also what prevented me from going through that grief process and that acceptance process. But also, I think I just kept thinking, almost like, if I ignore it, it will go away. And, if I just, if I, and I will go through therapy, we'll do everything that we can. I'll read everything. I'll, just work through it and push harder, and it will go away. And it took a long time to accept that, no, and it's an incurable disease. And even though, research is happening in the field, at the time, we do not have a cure for it. But I think knowing that you're not alone, and there are actually resources available, and there are communities that can help and support you is really important. And then there's something that we've done in our family that have worked really well. And I think first is we very early on, we decided with my husband, and it was a decision, like I say we decided, because it really was a conversation that we had, where we agreed that we would always be honest with each other, and we would talk through everything, and we would never judge each other. And I don't know where it came from and why on that day we decided to have that chat, and it was important to have it on the day, but we go back to it very often. And I mean, sometimes it's just, I'm tired, and sometimes, and I think it's important to admit, it's been, I feel like I can't keep going, and then the other one has to set up. And sometimes it's finding a solution and saying, well, should we go away for a weekend? Do we need to ask, for a night away, or, whatever it might be? Or, do you want me to take him for a couple of hours? Do you want to have more sleep? Whatever it might be, but we find a solution together. And I think for us, having that ability to be honest with the only other person who can, probably the most closely understand what you're going through, has been really important. Self-care and seek help. Like, I know I saw a therapist, and I would definitely encourage anyone who is going through a similar situation to make sure that they've got the support that they need.
I love all that.
That's great advice.
Yeah. I mean, you can't ask for anything better than that. I have to ask you, because you said that he just recently started talking. What was his first word?
So he, it's actually quite funny. So he he's been saying words for a long time, but it was, he had just a few words and they were kind of single word for a very, very long time. And his first word, so we had dad and mom, and he's very, very close to his dad. And I think that's thanks to the paternity leave, which was amazing. And then the first word, except for more and except for dad and mom, was more. And that's when his nanny wanted him to talk a bit more. And so she was asking me if she wanted more apple. And she was like, you have to say more. And then she's got it on video. You've got this cutest little sound coming out of his mouth going like, more.
Oh, precious.
He's obsessed with food, always has been, loves cooking.
That's so awesome.
A lot, and probably about 80% of his vocabulary is food related.
Wow.
Which is really cute. Like he knows, 20 different kinds of cheese varieties. And then, but there's some vocabulary that is just not in his realm. Like he's
gonna be a master chef, man.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. I'm pretty sure it will be something food related, definitely.
Yeah, really.
Does he have a favorite thing to cook? I don't know if you would know that. I don't know if that's like a weird question, but
pretty much anything. He loves to cook and bake at the moment. And what's funny is he loves to bake, but he doesn't like to eat cake. So
that's hilarious.
But not cake. And so he will, like every weekend we have to bake a cake, but then he will not eat it. So
the family is gaining pounds except for him. Gaining those cake pounds.
That's adorable.
That's so funny.
It's really cute. Yeah, no, he's really cute, and he's really excited when we cook. So in winter we do a lot of soups and that kind of stuff because it takes time as well. So it's kind of like, how do you use the time and get him focused on an activity?
There you go.
Have you seen these like roasted soups where it's like you take like a bunch of tomatoes and you like cut them and you put them in a pan with like garlic and you roast it in the oven, and all you have to do is take them out, add vegetable stock, and then like use a blender and blend it all up, and bam, tomato soup.
Oh no, I have not.
Yes. Look up like a roasted soup because it's very like, and I like got like down into like a hole in Instagram where it was like I saw like every type of roasted soup, I swear. I was like, oh, butternut squash, interesting.
Oh, okay. I will definitely be looking it up.
It'll be a soup that won't take nearly as much time for him.
Yeah, that that's good. We can try the other things. So
oh yeah, of course.
I mean, if he likes to cook, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I did try the tomato soup one because I had some tomatoes that were like, they weren't bad yet, but they were kind of getting a little wrinkly. So yes. I tossed them in the oven. Like I followed what they did. It was actually really good tomato soup. I was like, wow.
Okay, we'll try that. He does like soup, so we'll try that definitely.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to add it.
No, you're fine.
So if you could take a family trip anywhere, where would you go?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And we love traveling. It has definitely been a bit more challenging recently, because to be honest, when Elliott was a baby, he loved it. And it's one of these funny things. And I think that's why it took the doctor so long to diagnose ASD, is that he actually loves being in new environments.
Okay.
Then what has transpired more recently is that he loves new faces, new environment, but then the anxiety kind of spikes when he doesn't have a routine. So you're kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place, because he's doing new stuff and he enjoys going away, but then he gets really anxious if he doesn't follow like his routine.
Yeah, I bet.
But we traveled a lot when he was a baby, and the past obviously a couple of years with COVID, not so much, but this past summer we've been able to travel a bit more again. And one thing that we've always dreamt about doing, and I'm hoping that one day we'll be able to do, is actually the national parks in the US. Like
they're good.
Yeah, I've studied in the US, and so I've done some of them, but I have done Yosemite, and that's such a dream. And I wish one day we can, just go as a family and spend a couple of weeks there. So
wow, I feel spoiled now. You know what I mean? Because it's like I live in the US and you don't really think of it as like a place, I want to go to Paris, but then people from France want to come here. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Yes, yeah, it does.
Like, oh, wait, yeah, we do have great national parks, but I
We
always want to
do.
go to Paris or wherever.
Yeah. No. So that's one that we hope we'll be able to do one day. I mean, he's traveled well before, but he hasn't been on a plane for, over 2 years. So we'll see how that
Big
goes
trip
whenever.
for you guys. That there's a lot of
Yeah.
parks out here. It's a lot of travel, like, period.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Well-
I mean, it's not something we'll do tomorrow, but I'm
One
hoping
day.
that one day.
Work
Yeah.
up to it.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, fingers crossed that you guys will get to do that at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Hopefully we will.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for taking out the time to spend with us. I know it's got to be super early in France right now, so thank you for taking the time to chat with us. It's been wonderful to hear your and Elliott and your whole family's story.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for having me. And it's been such a pleasure to be speaking with you. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been fun. Anything else to add for our listeners?
No, I think, just a big thank you to you. And of course, the book, I'm hopeful, will be a great resource. It's called The Letter E, which I'm not sure we've actually mentioned. And the fun fact about it is, I've decided to give it the title The Letter E because it stands for, epilepsy and electroencephalogram and emergency room. But it also stands for enthusiasm, and we're a French-speaking family, and it stands for espoir, which means hope in English. So
That's beautiful.
That's awesome. All right. Well, this is how to deal with shit when shit gets real. Thank you, Claire, for joining us, and we'll see you guys next episode.